My brother slept with my girlfriend of 3 years, got her pregnant before we even broke up, and secretly married her at a courthouse while I was away at college. Later, he called me laughing, and when I finally confronted him at our mom's house, he just smirked and said, "You snooze. You lose. She picked the better brother." That was the day I cut them both out of my life for good. Hey, Reddit. So yesterday I dropped a bomb at my dad's funeral that's been 28 years in the making. My brother Jake stole my girlfriend, got her pregnant while we were still together, married her behind my back, and spent 3 decades thinking he got away with it. Spoiler alert, he didn't. And the fallout has been absolutely nuclear. Before I get into what happened yesterday, you need the full backstory because this isn't just some petty family drama. This is 28 years of calculated manipulation, abuse, and lies finally catching up to someone who thought he was untouchable. The words left my mouth before I fully registered saying them. The reception hall at St. Michael's Community Center went dead silent. Not the kind of quiet where people gradually notice something interesting is happening. This was instant vacuum of sound. Forks stopped midair. My cousin Andrew choked on his water. Margaret's hand flew to her pearls like I just announced I was running for office on a platform of arson. Jake's face went completely white. Jessica, sitting next to him in that black dress she probably thought made her look dignified, froze with her glass halfway to her lips. I kept going, because once you start a thing like this, you don't pump the brakes halfway through. Every single thing, I said, my voice carrying across the 63 people who showed up to mourn my father. And I want you both to know Dad knew too. He knew for the last 3 years. He made sure the right people would find out when the time came. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, walked past my daughter Olivia's horrified expression, past my wife Amanda's knowing nod, and straight out the door into the October afternoon. Behind me, I heard Jake's chair scrape against the floor. Jessica's voice rose in panic. Confusion rippled through a family that had spent nearly 3 decades pretending everything was fine. 24 hours later, their entire lives would collapse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why that moment meant everything, why I waited 28 years for it, you need to understand what Jake took from me. Not just Jessica, not just my youth or my trust or my ability to love without suspicion. He took my entire understanding of who I was supposed to be in this world. I was 21 when it happened, junior at Stanford studying computer science back when that meant something different than it does now. This was the early 90s when knowing how to code actually meant something special, before every other person claimed to be a developer after a weekend boot camp. Jessica Miller was the first woman I ever loved genuinely and deeply. In that way young men love when they haven't yet learned that love requires more than just intensity. She was brilliant, funny, had this way of looking at the world that made everything seem brighter. We met in high school during a physics lab, where she was the only one who didn't treat me like a nerd for actually understanding the equations. She was heading toward medical school even then, talking about becoming a pediatric surgeon, about helping kids who couldn't help themselves. We'd been together since senior year of high school, making it work through college. She was pre-med at Berkeley, and we made the long-distance work through late-night phone calls that lasted until 3 a.m. and weekend visits that cost me most of my campus job earnings. I worked at the campus bookstore 20 hours a week just to afford the gas money to drive and see her every other weekend. My roommate used to joke that I was more committed to those drives than to my actual classes. My hands still remember the feel of hers, the way she'd trace circles on my palm during long car rides. Not saying anything, just connecting. Those little moments of intimacy that you don't appreciate until they're gone, and you realize you'd give anything to feel them again. She had this laugh that started quiet and built until it took over her whole body. Making her laugh became my primary ambition in life. We talked about marriage constantly, about kids, about the house we'd buy someday with good schools and yard space for a dog. She wanted 2 kids, maybe 3. We'd even picked out names. We had a 5-year plan. Graduate, get jobs in the Bay Area, she'd finish med school, we'd get married, start our lives together. That plan was so real to me I could taste it. Jake was 2 years younger, a freshman at community college because he'd never had the grades for anything else. Our parents pretended this didn't bother them, but I saw the way Dad's eyes lit up when he talked about my classes versus the way they deflected when Jake mentioned his. The comparison was always there, unspoken but obvious. Jake saw it too, and he hated it. He started asking about Jessica during my sophomore year. Casual questions at first. How's she doing? What's she studying? I thought he was being a good brother. Looking back, I was handing him the blueprint for stealing her. I told him everything. Her favorite restaurants, the movies that made her cry, the way she loved surprises but hated uncertainty. Every detail that would later become ammunition. Christmas break of my junior year. Jake announced he was hanging out with Jessica while I was busy studying. Just keeping her company, he said. She must get lonely with you gone all the time. He said it with this concerned expression, like he genuinely cared about her well-being, like he was doing me a favor by making sure my girlfriend wasn't lonely. I actually thanked him for being thoughtful. Can you believe that? I thanked him for the opportunity to steal my girlfriend. Our parents beamed at how close their sons were, how Jake was stepping up to help his brother, how wonderful it was that we all got along so well. Mom actually said she was proud of how mature we both were, how adult, how rare it was for brothers to be so supportive of each other. The signs were everywhere, but I was too trusting, too in love, too blind to see them. Jessica stopped answering calls as quickly, before she'd pick up on the first or second ring. Suddenly it was going to voicemail, getting callbacks hours later. Her voice on the phone grew distant, distracted. Conversations that used to flow naturally started feeling forced, like she was going through the motions because she had to, not because she wanted to. She started cutting conversations short, citing exhaustion from studying, from work, from life in general. Before we could talk for hours about nothing and everything. Suddenly 15 minutes was pushing it. She'd yawn, say she needed sleep, promise to call tomorrow. Tomorrow would come and I'd be the one calling her. When I visited in February, she flinched when I touched her shoulder, actually physically recoiled like I was a stranger who'd gotten too close. That should have been my wake-up call right there, but I was determined to make excuses for it. Just stressed, she said. Medical school applications are brutal. I believed her because I wanted to believe her, because the alternative that something was wrong, that she was pulling away, that maybe I wasn't enough was too painful to examine directly. The call came on a Thursday in March. I remember because I'd just aced my algorithms midterm and was planning to call Jessica to celebrate. She answered on the first ring. That should have been my first clue something was wrong. Ryan, I need to tell you something. The quality of her voice, flat and rehearsed like she'd reading from a script, told me everything before she said another word. I'm pregnant. It's Jake's. 2 words that tilted my world sideways. We've been seeing each other since Christmas. I'm sorry, but I love him. I'm marrying him next week at the courthouse. The rest came in a rush like she'd been holding her breath. His lease starts next month. We're moving in together. This is what's best for everyone. Click. 3 years compressed into 90 seconds in a dial tone. I called her back immediately. Voicemail. Called again, 17 times total. Each time hoping she'd answer. Each time getting that same cheerful voicemail message we'd recorded together months ago. A recording from a different lifetime. My roommate found me on the floor of our dorm room at 2 a.m. still holding the phone, staring at a crack in the ceiling I'd never noticed before. He thought someone had died. In a way, someone had. I called Jake the next morning. He picked up on the 3rd ring, and the first thing I heard was laughter. Turkey gobble laughter. Long enough to figure it out, he said. She told me she'd been faking it with you for months. She said you were boring, predictable. Said being with me felt like actually living. I tried to say something. Words failed. You snooze, you lose, big brother. She chose the better man. Deal with it. The line went dead. I drove home that weekend. 5-hour blur of rage and disbelief. The radio played songs I couldn't hear. Other cars passed me without registering. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. Stayed white for days afterward. When I confronted Jake at our parents' house, he didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He was sprawled on the living room couch watching a basketball game, bag of chips open on his stomach. What do you want me to say? He actually shrugged. A lazy roll of his shoulders that made me want to break something. She chose the better brother. Get over it. She was mine. We had plans. We had a future. Had. Past tense. Sounds like you're catching up. He returned his attention to the screen. Close the door on your way out. Mom appeared in the doorway then, her face a wreck of guilt and helplessness. Dad stood behind her, jaw so tight I could see the muscle twitching. Neither of them said what I needed to hear. Neither of them told Jake he was wrong. That silence told me everything. My little brother had stolen my girlfriend, gotten her pregnant, and was going to marry her. And my parents were going to let it happen because addressing it would be uncomfortable. Because keeping the peace mattered more than keeping faith with the son who'd actually earned their respect. I walked out that day and didn't speak to any of them for months. Jake and Jessica got married at a courthouse the following week. No family invited, no ceremony. Just 2 people and a judge, and a lie they'd convinced themselves was love. I went back to Stanford and threw myself into my studies with the kind of manic intensity that probably concerned my professors. I graduated with honors, landed a job at a software company before the diploma was even printed, and moved across the country to Seattle. Physical distance from the wreckage of my old life. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving that year, or Christmas, or Easter. I sent my parents a card on their birthdays and called on Mother's Day and Father's Day because I wasn't ready to completely sever ties, but I wasn't ready to forgive either. They never asked me to reconcile with Jake. Maybe they knew it was pointless. Maybe they were just relieved not to deal with the tension. Jake and Jessica had their first kid in October. Ethan, my nephew. I found out from an aunt who thought surely I'd want to know. I sent a card with $50 in it because that felt like the minimum socially acceptable response. Didn't sign it, didn't write a message, just cash and a store-bought card with congratulations printed in cursive font. A second kid came 3 years later. Caleb. Same response from me. Same emptiness. By then I'd met Amanda. She was a civil engineer working on a project adjacent to one of ours. Smart, funny, patient with my baggage in a way that suggested she had some of her own. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. Got married in a small ceremony in her hometown with her family and my college friends. I invited my parents. They came. They didn't bring Jake or Jessica or ask if they could. That was the agreement we'd silently reached. They could have a relationship with me or they could have Jake's family events, but not both in the same room. Amanda and I had Olivia a year into our marriage. She's the best thing I've ever done. Smart like her mother, stubborn like me with this fierce sense of justice that probably comes from growing up hearing carefully edited versions of why she only has grandparents on one side of the family. The years passed. I built a career. Amanda built hers. Olivia grew up. We were happy in that quiet, unremarkable way that doesn't make for good stories, but makes for a good life. I thought about Jake sometimes. Wondered if he was happy. If Jessica was. If they ever felt guilty for what they'd done. Mostly, though, I just didn't think about them at all. Then, 3 years ago, Dad got sick. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that moves fast and doesn't negotiate. Stage 4. By the time they caught it, which meant months, not years, he called me himself to tell me. His voice on the phone sounded smaller than I remembered. Older. Mortal. That was the worst part, realizing that your parents aren't invincible. That time catches everyone eventually. I need to tell you some things, he said after the diagnosis talk was done. Before I can't anymore. Before the cancer or the medication takes away my ability to say what needs to be said. I flew out the next week. Left work on a Friday. Took emergency family leave. We met at a diner halfway between his house and the airport. Neutral territory. Not his house where the ghosts of family dinners past would hover. Not somewhere public enough that people would overhear. Just a quiet booth in a place that served decent coffee and didn't ask questions. He looked worse than I'd expected. Much worse. The photos Mom had been sending clearly didn't capture the full reality. He'd lost at least 30 pounds. His skin had that grayish tint people get when their organs are failing. Thinner. Grayer. Like someone had taken my father and made a rough draft sketch of him. All the details faded and imprecise. I should have said something, he started without preamble. No small talk. No easing into it. When Jake did what he did, I should have told him it was wrong. I should have stood up for you. I should have kicked him out of the house. I should have called Jessica's parents. I should have done something, anything, other than what I actually did, which was nothing. And that nothing has been eating at me for 28 years like its own kind of cancer. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and drank my coffee and waited for him to continue. There's more, he said. Things about Jake you don't know. Things I found out over the years. Things I should have told you but didn't. Because I kept thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. Maybe I was being paranoid or judgmental. But I wasn't wrong. I was seeing exactly what was there. And I chose to look away. Because confronting it would have been uncomfortable. That's when he told me everything. And I mean everything. He laid it all out like he'd been rehearsing this conversation in his head for years. Waiting for the right moment. Or maybe just waiting until he had no choice but to speak. Jake didn't just steal Jessica. He systematically isolated her from everyone who'd ever cared about her. Her friends from high school stopped hearing from her within a year of the marriage. Her family got carefully managed visits where Jake was always present, always controlling the conversation. He systematically controlled her in ways that crossed every line from partnership into abuse. Financial abuse, emotional abuse. And Dad suspected physical abuse, though Jessica had gotten very good at hiding it. He'd been doing it since before they were married, and he'd gotten progressively worse over the years. Testing boundaries, seeing what he could get away with. Dad had seen bruises. On her arms where fingers had gripped too hard. On her wrists where she'd been grabbed. Once on her face, poorly covered with makeup that she insisted came from walking into a cabinet door. He'd heard raised voices through the walls during family visits. Heard Jessica crying in the bathroom. Heard Jake's voice low and threatening, the words indistinct, but the tone unmistakable. He'd watched Jessica's spark dim over the years, until she was a ghost of the woman I'd known. The bright pre-med student with plans to save the world had become someone who flinched at loud noises and checked her phone constantly, terrified of missing a text from Jake. Someone who asked permission before expressing an opinion. Someone who'd learned that the path of least resistance was to agree with whatever Jake said and disappear into herself. Dad had confronted Jake once, just once, about 3 years into the marriage, when the signs were too obvious to ignore. Jake had threatened to cut them off from seeing the grandkids entirely, said if Dad ever brought it up again, if he ever said one word to Jessica about his suspicions, they'd move across the country and change their number. The grandkids would grow up not knowing their grandparents even existed, so Dad stayed quiet and hated himself for it. Chose access to his grandchildren over protecting the daughter-in-law he knew was being abused. Every time he saw them after that, the guilt ate at him a little more. But there was more. Dad had found out that Jake had been stealing from their joint accounts. Small amounts at first, 50 here, 100 there, explained away as cash withdrawals for groceries or gas. Then larger ones as Jessica stopped questioning. 1,000 for a supposed car repair that never happened. 5,000 for an investment opportunity that somehow never materialized. Jake had a spending problem. Electronics he didn't need. Expensive watches. Designer clothes. All bought on credit he couldn't afford to repay. Worse, he'd taken out credit cards in Jessica's name without her knowledge. Forged her signature on loan applications. Ruined her credit score until she couldn't qualify for anything on her own. It was deliberate, calculated. Every move designed to trap her further. To make leaving harder. To ensure she had nowhere to go, even if she wanted to escape. And then the thing that made my blood run cold. That made me understand just how methodical Jake's manipulation had been from the very beginning. Dad had found evidence that Jake had intercepted letters. Letters from Jessica to me in the year after they got married. At least 3 letters. Probably more. Letters she'd written begging me to understand what really happened. To know that she never really chose him. To come find her. To help her escape before it was too late. She'd been smart about it. Saved cash from grocery money. Bought stamps at a post office in a different town. Mailed them from there so Jake wouldn't see. But Jake had found them somehow. Maybe went through her purse. Maybe followed her. Maybe she'd made one small mistake and he'd caught on. However it happened, he'd intercepted every single letter before it could reach me. Jake had collected them. Kept them in a box in his garage like trophies. Evidence of his victory. Proof that he'd stolen Jessica so completely that even her attempts to reach out for help had been thwarted. Dad found them when he was helping Jake move some furniture a few years back. Jake had left the garage door open, the box sitting on a shelf in plain sight. Maybe he'd gotten cocky. Maybe he thought no one would look. But Dad had seen his handwriting on the box label and gotten curious. Inside were the letters from Jessica to me. Letters from me to Jessica from those first few months after the breakup, also intercepted somehow. And a journal. Jake's own journal. Pages of it, detailing his plan to steal Jessica. How he'd studied her. Learned her patterns. Figured out exactly what to say and when to say it. How he deliberately created situations where she was vulnerable, and he was there to comfort her. How he'd used every piece of information I'd told him about her against us both. It was all laid out. The whole calculated campaign. Nothing about it had been spontaneous or natural. It was premeditated theft of another person's life. Dad had photographed everything with his phone, made digital copies, kept them backed up in 3 different places. When he got sick, he put physical copies in his safety deposit box, along with written documentation of everything he'd observed over the years. Dates, times, descriptions of bruises, recordings of arguments. He'd been collecting evidence for years, too much of a coward to use it while he was healthy, but determined that it would come out eventually. "I need you to have these," Dad said, sliding a thick manila envelope across the diner table. His hands shook slightly. Whether from the cancer or the weight of what he was handing over, I couldn't tell. "When the time comes, when you're ready, I need you to make this right. I can't do it myself. I'm running out of time and courage both. But you can. You were always the strong one, Ryan. The good one. The one who knew right from wrong and had the spine to act on it. Make him answer for what he did. Not just to you. To Jessica. To Kyle. To everyone. Kyle. Jessica's younger brother. That was the other thing Dad told me that night. Kyle had figured out what was going on. Had confronted Jake about the abuse. Had threatened to help Jessica leave. To expose everything. 2 weeks later, Kyle was dead. Hiking accident, they said. Fell from a cliff during a solo trip. But Jake had been on that same trail that same day. Witnesses had seen them arguing near the cliff edge. The police investigated but couldn't prove anything. Ruled it accidental. Closed the case. But Dad had kept digging. Had found text messages between Jake and Kyle that the police either missed or chose to ignore. Threatening messages from Jake. Warnings to mind his own business. Implications that something bad might happen if Kyle didn't back off. The messages had been deleted from Jake's phone, but Kyle had backed his up to a cloud account that his parents had access to after he died. Jessica's parents had shown them to Dad years ago. They suspected, but could never prove. Couldn't bear to push it, because they'd already lost one child, and they couldn't risk losing their daughter too by accusing her husband of murder. I sat in that diner booth reading document after document, text message printouts, journal photocopies, a timeline Dad had constructed showing every piece of evidence, every incident, every moment that proved Jake wasn't just a cheating asshole, but a methodical abuser, and quite possibly a murderer. I took the envelope, read every word of it that night in my hotel room, sat up until 4 a.m. going through page after page. Each one was a knife in my chest. Jessica writing about being trapped, about being scared, about Jake's temper, about the pregnancy being accidental at first, then later deliberately how Jake had sabotaged her birth control without her knowledge, because a baby would ensure she couldn't leave, about the baby being her chain. Please don't give up on me, one letter from 1994 ended. Please. I'll wait however long it takes. I know you probably hate me. I know you probably never want to see me again. But if there's any part of you that remembers what we had, please come find me. I'm so scared, and I don't know how much longer I can survive this. But I'd never gotten them. Never had the chance to respond. Never knew she'd tried to reach me. Jake had made absolutely certain of that. I asked Dad why he didn't go to the police with all this. Why he didn't help Jessica himself. Why he sat on evidence of abuse and possible murder for years without acting. I was a coward, he said simply. His voice was flat, matter of fact. He wasn't making excuses. I told myself it wasn't my place, that maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed, that if I just stayed quiet and kept the peace, everyone would be fine. I told myself the police had already investigated Kyle's death and found nothing, so what could I possibly add? I told myself that maybe Jessica was staying because she wanted to, that it was her choice, that interfering would just make things worse. He looked at me then, with eyes that held 3 decades of regret. I was wrong about all of it. I was a coward who chose comfort over courage. Who chose keeping the family together on the surface over actually protecting the people in it. And now I'm dying and I can't fix it. But maybe you can. Maybe you can be the person I should have been. We spent the next 2 years staying in touch more than we had in decades. Phone calls every week, visits every month when his health allowed it. Dad's health declined in stages. Good weeks where he almost seemed like his old self. Bad weeks where the cancer and chemo left him too weak to leave bed. And then just bad weeks and worse weeks as the good days stopped coming entirely. He made me promise I'd wait until he was gone to do anything with the information he'd given me. Made me swear it. I can't face it, he admitted during one of our last real conversations, when the morphine had loosened his tongue enough to be fully honest. Can't watch it all fall apart. That makes me even more of a coward, I know. Can't even face the consequences of finally doing the right thing. But I need you to be the one who's brave enough to tell the truth when I'm not around to see the fallout. Wait until I'm gone. Then burn it all down. Make sure everyone knows what he did. Promise me. I promised. He died on a Tuesday in October. 68 years old. Pancreatic cancer finally won the fight it was always going to win. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday. 4 days to sit with everything he'd told me. 4 days to plan exactly what I was going to say and when. Mom called me to help with arrangements. I said yes. Flew out with Amanda. Olivia met us there. The service was at St. Michael's, the church Dad had attended sporadically for 40 years. The reception was in the community center attached to it. Jake was there, of course. Jessica, too. Looking older, but not necessarily wiser. Ethan came with his girlfriend, Nina. Caleb flew in from Alaska, where he'd moved to get away from his father. That should have told me something right there. When your kid moves to literally the farthest state from you geographically, there's usually a reason. Olivia cornered me during the reception. My daughter is 19 now, studying psychology at Berkeley, and she's got her mother's talent for reading people and my tendency toward directness. You need to talk to Uncle Jake, she said, for the family's sake, for Grandpa's memory. Whatever happened between you two was almost 30 years ago. Don't you think it's time to let it go? I looked at her. My smart, beautiful daughter who had no idea what she was asking. Who thought family meant unconditional forgiveness? Who believed that time healed all wounds? and that being the bigger person was always the right choice. No, I said simply. Dad, please. Just talk to him. Say something. Anything. This silent treatment has gone on long enough. She grabbed my hand, led me across the room to where Jake and Jessica were sitting at a table in the corner. They saw us coming. Jessica's face went carefully neutral. Jake's got that fake smile he always puts on when he's trying to look like a reasonable person. Olivia made some pleasantries, asked about the grandkids, mentioned how good it was that we were all together for such a sad occasion. The kind of small talk that's meant to build bridges, but usually just highlights how far apart the shores really are. Then she looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to take the olive branch she was offering and do something conciliatory with it, to be the bigger person, to forgive, to move on. And that's when I said it, looking Jake dead in the eyes. Then Jessica, making sure they both heard every word clearly. I know what you did to Kyle. The color drained from both their faces simultaneously. Kyle was Jessica's younger brother, the one who died in a hiking accident 5 years ago. At least that's what everyone had been told. I know what you did to Kyle, I repeated. Every single thing. And I want you both to know Dad knew too. He knew for the last 3 years. He made sure the right people would find out when the time came. Then I walked away. The thing about dropping bombs is that the explosion isn't immediate. There's always a delay, a moment where the world holds its breath before everything detonates. I got in my rental car, drove back to the hotel. Amanda was already there, having left the reception early with a headache that was probably more diplomatic than medical. I told her what I'd done. Good, she said simply. It's about time. The first call came an hour later. Mom, sobbing, demanding to know what I meant, what I was talking about, why I would say something so horrible at my own father's funeral. I told her to check Dad's safety deposit box, the one at First National Bank downtown, the one she had access to as his widow. Everything she needed to know was in there. She hung up on me. The second call came from Jessica. Her voice was shaking. What did your father tell you? She asked. Everything, I said. About the letters you sent me that Jake intercepted. About the financial abuse. About Kyle. All of it. Silence on the other end. Then quietly, almost a whisper. Thank you. She hung up. The third call came from Ethan, my nephew who I'd met maybe 5 times in 28 years, who'd grown up hearing some version of the story where his Uncle Ryan was the bitter older brother who couldn't get over ancient history. Is it true? He asked. About my dad? Yes, I said. All of it. Mom's packing a bag, he said. She's leaving. Finally leaving. She asked me to tell you she's sorry. For everything. For not fighting harder. For not reaching out. For believing his lies about you. Tell her she doesn't owe me an apology, I said. Tell her I should have tried harder to find her. Tell her I'm sorry it took this long. More silence. Then, what happened to Uncle Kyle? This was the part I'd been dreading. The part Dad had told me about in hushed tones during one of our last conversations. The part that had made him cry for the first time since I was a kid. Kyle had found out about Jake's abuse, confronted him, threatened to tell everyone, to help Jessica leave, to expose everything. Jake had followed him on a hiking trip. They'd argued at the edge of a cliff, and Kyle had fallen, or been pushed. The evidence wasn't conclusive. The police ruled it an accident. But Dad had found text messages, threatening texts from Jake to Kyle in the days before the trip. Texts that Jake had deleted, but that Dad had recovered from an old phone backup. Dad had given everything to James Wilson, a friend from college who'd gone on to become a federal prosecutor. Told him to wait until after the funeral to look into it officially, to give the family time to mourn one loss before dealing with another. I told Ethan the truth, all of it. He deserved to know what his father really was. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that broke my heart. I always knew something was wrong, he said. Mom was always so scared, always walking on eggshells. I just didn't know what to do about it. I was just a kid, and then I wasn't a kid anymore, but I still didn't know how to help her. You can help her now, I said. Be there for her. Support her. She's going to need it. 24 hours after I walked out of that reception hall, everything collapsed exactly the way Dad had planned it. Mom went to the bank, found the safety deposit box. Inside were copies of everything. The intercepted letters, the financial documents showing Jake's fraud, the recovered text messages between Jake and Kyle, a detailed account Dad had written of everything he'd witnessed over the years, every bruise he'd seen on Jessica, every time she'd flinched, every excuse Jake had made. There was also a letter from Dad to Mom, apologizing for his silence, begging her to make things right, asking her to support Jessica in leaving, to help her rebuild, to be the partner to her that he should have been. Mom called Jessica that afternoon. They talked for hours. By evening, Mom had helped Jessica move into a hotel. By the next day, she'd helped her find a lawyer. A good one. The kind who specializes in cases like this. James Wilson called me that same day. Said he'd reviewed everything Dad had given him. That there was enough evidence to reopen Kyle's case. That Jake would be facing questions from the police very soon. That even if they couldn't prove Kyle's death was murder, the financial crimes alone would likely result in charges. Your father was meticulous, James said. He documented everything. It's like he spent the last 3 years of his life building an airtight case. He did, I said. That's exactly what he did. Jake was arrested a week later. Not for Kyle's death yet, but for the financial crimes. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. The list went on. His bail was set high enough that he couldn't make it. Sat in county jail while the investigation into Kyle continued. Jessica filed for divorce, got a restraining order, moved in with Ethan temporarily while she figured out her next steps. Mom sold Dad's house and split the proceeds with Jessica, saying it was the least she could do after years of enabling Jake's behavior through her silence. Caleb flew back from Alaska, reconnected with his mother for the first time in years, started therapy to deal with growing up in a household where violence was normal. Ethan did the same. And me? I went back to Seattle, back to my life, but something had shifted. The weight I'd been carrying for 28 years, the weight of betrayal and unanswered questions and wondering if I could have done something different, it was lighter now, not gone. Trauma doesn't disappear just because the person who caused it gets what they deserve, but lighter, manageable. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true. My daughter said, the best gift would be having a decent father, not a pathetic loser like you. My wife agreed. So I returned the car I got her, moved out, and filed for divorce. What I did next left them both scrambling. Hey Reddit, my daughter said that at her birthday after mocking the gift I bought her. You humiliated me in front of my friends, she said. And my wife just nodded along like I was the one being unreasonable. So I taught them both a lesson they'll never forget. Name's Jacob, 54 male, living in Traverse City, Michigan. I've been a mechanic my whole adult life. 31 years of busted knuckles, brake dust in my lungs, and that motor oil smell that won't come off no matter how hard you scrub. I own my own shop now. Sheridan Auto. 6 bays and a reputation for honest work. Her name is Paige, my daughter. The girl I used to carry on my shoulders at county fairs because she wanted to see over the crowd. The girl who cried into my shirt when her first boyfriend dumped her. I sat there patting her back like an idiot, telling her she deserved better. Apparently, she agreed with that last part a little too much. 26 years old. I'd raised her since she was a screaming potato in a blanket. Changed the diapers, paid for the braces, taught her how to drive in a parking lot behind the Kroger on Saturdays when her mother was too busy getting her nails done. And this was what I got, in front of her friends, on her birthday, while a $32,000 car sat in the driveway with a bow on it that took me 20 minutes to tie. The party was Paige's idea. She wanted something big for her 26th birthday. A backyard bash with her friends, her fiancé, and enough decorations to make the neighbors think we'd lost our minds. My wife, Colleen, handled the planning. I handled the bill. That's how it had worked for 28 years of marriage. I spent the week before the party stringing lights across the backyard, setting up tables, hauling chairs from the rental place because Paige insisted plastic lawn furniture was too tacky. By the time the first guests arrived, I was already tired. But I smiled, shook hands, made small talk with people I barely knew, and waited for the right moment to bring out the gift. I'd been planning the car for months. Paige's old Honda was on its last legs, burning oil and making sounds that kept me up at night, worrying she'd break down on some back road. A Mazda CX-30. Reliable, safe, good on gas. I test drove 3 of them before picking the one with the best safety ratings. Even got it in her favorite color, that dark blue she always pointed out when we passed the dealership. The look on her face when she saw it wasn't disappointment. It was disgust. A Mazda, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Dad, seriously? I could feel the whole vibe shift. 20 or so people suddenly very interested in the appetizer table. Her fiancé, a guy named Chester who sold insurance, stood there with his arms crossed like he was watching a show. It's brand new, I said. $32,000. Top safety ratings. 4 years of warranty. It's a Mazda, she repeated, like I'd handed her a bicycle with a missing wheel. You know I wanted a BMW. We talked about this. Mom showed you the ones I liked. Those started at $55,000, Paige. So, You own a business. I looked at my daughter then. Really looked. The expensive highlights in her hair, the designer bag hanging off her shoulder, the engagement ring that Chester's parents had probably paid for because that kid couldn't afford a ring pop on his own commission. She'd never worked a job that left her sore at the end of the day. Never had to choose between fixing her car and paying rent. Never understood that money came from somewhere, from hours bent under hoods in a shop that hit 100 degrees in July. Then she dropped this bomb. You know what? She said, and I swear she glanced at her friends to make sure they were listening. The best gift would be having a decent father who actually gets me what I want. You could hear a pin drop. I turned to look at Colleen, standing by the back door with an iced tea in her hand. My wife of 28 years. Her expression said it all before she even opened her mouth. You humiliated her in front of her friends with that pathetic car, Colleen said. What did you expect? I nodded once. Not because I agreed, because I finally understood something I'd been too stubborn to see for years. I wasn't a husband or a father anymore. I was an ATM with a pulse. All right, I said. Paige's expression shifted. She'd been expecting an argument, expected me to get defensive, maybe apologize. Definitely given the way I always had. I pulled the bow off the Mazda, wadded it up, and tossed it in the garbage can by the garage. Then I got in the car and drove away. No yelling, just the smooth hum of the engine. My brother lives 20 minutes outside town in a house he built himself over 3 summers when he was still married. The marriage didn't last, but the house did. That's Victor for you. Everything he touches either falls apart or stands forever. No middle ground. Vic's 4 years older. He went through his own divorce 8 years ago. His ex-wife took the kids to Ohio and left him with nothing but the house and a woodworking hobby that started as a distraction and became an obsession. He's got 2 sons he sees twice a year, if he's lucky. If anyone understood what I was going through, it was him. He was on his porch when I pulled up, feet kicked up on the railing, watching the sunset. Nice car, he said as I got out. Is it yours? It was supposed to be for Paige, her birthday gift. He raised an eyebrow. Was? I told him what happened. The whole ugly scene in the driveway. Every word my daughter said. Every word my wife didn't have to say, because her face did the talking for her. Vic listened without interrupting. When I finished, he just nodded slowly, like he was thinking it over. You can stay in the spare room, he said. Long as you need. I grabbed the overnight bag I keep in my truck for emergencies and followed him inside. The spare room was small but clean. Single bed, bare walls, a window that looked out over the woods behind his property. I sat on the edge of the mattress and stared at my hands for a long time. Grease under the fingernails, scars across the knuckles, the permanent calluses that never went away. These hands had rebuilt transmissions, replaced timing chains, saved customers thousands of dollars by catching problems early. These hands had also built a treehouse for Paige when she was 7, taught her to throw a baseball when she was 9, helped her move into her first apartment when she was 22. Apparently none of that was worth as much as a German logo on a hood. The next morning, I drove the Mazda back to the dealership. The salesman who'd helped me, a young guy named Dennis, who'd spent an hour making sure I got exactly what I wanted, looked confused when I walked in. Everything okay with the vehicle, Mr. Sheridan? Vehicle's fine, I said. Situation's changed. I need to sell it back. He winced. Dealerships don't do returns on new cars. Everyone knows that. But they do buy vehicles. And a 3-day-old Mazda with 47 miles on it was about as close to new inventory as they could get without unwrapping the plastic. Dennis brought in his manager, a guy I'd done brake work for a few years back. We talked numbers. They offered me $26,000. I countered at 28. We settled at 27, which meant I ate about $7,000 after taxes and fees on a car that had barely left the lot. Expensive lesson, but cheaper than a lifetime of resentment. I signed the paperwork, watched them process the check, and walked out with a lighter wallet and a clearer head. Vic was waiting for me when I got back, sitting in his workshop with sawdust on his flannel and a half-finished rocking chair between his knees. Returned it, I said. Good. He didn't look up from his sanding. Now what? I'd been asking myself the same question all morning. My phone had 25 missed calls, a mix of Colleen and Paige. I hadn't listened to a single voicemail. Didn't need to. I knew how it would go. You're overreacting. You're being dramatic. You're making this about yourself. I'm going to see a lawyer, I said. Vic stopped sanding, looked up at me for the first time. Divorce? 28 years of marriage, and she called a $32,000 gift pathetic. She didn't just side with Paige, she piled on. In front of everyone. He set down his sandpaper and wiped his hands on his jeans. You're sure about this? Not just angry? I'm angry, I admitted. But I'm also thinking straight. Vic nodded. I know a guy. Same one I used. He wrote down a name and number on a scrap of wood and handed it to me. Leonard, Traverse City. I called the next day and scheduled a consultation for the end of the week. The receptionist asked if this was a contested or uncontested matter. I told her I honestly didn't know yet, but I had a feeling it wouldn't be friendly. The law office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a sandwich shop. Not exactly impressive. The man himself matched the office. Mid-60s, gray beard, reading glasses perched on his nose. Tell me about your assets, he said after we'd covered the basics. I walked him through it. The house, purchased 22 years ago, paid off 9 years early because I worked overtime every chance I got. The shop, which I'd built from nothing with a small business loan I'd repaid in full 8 years ago. 2 vehicles, retirement accounts, a savings account that I'd been quietly building for years without telling Colleen because she treated money like it grew on trees. Leonard took notes, asked questions, made sounds that could have been approval or concern. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me. Michigan is an equitable distribution state, he said, not community property. The court divides assets based on what's fair, not necessarily 50-50. What does that mean for me? It means we can argue that assets you brought into the marriage, assets you built independently, should weigh in your favor. Your business, for instance. Your wife's contribution to that business would be evaluated. She's never set foot in my shop except to complain about the smell. He almost smiled. Document everything. The more records you have, the better your position. I'd been documenting everything for years, without even realizing it. Tax returns, business receipts, maintenance logs for every vehicle we'd owned. I'm a mechanic. Paperwork is half the job. Every repair gets written up. Every part gets a receipt. Every hour gets logged. That weekend, Vic helped me move the rest of my stuff out of the house. Colleen wasn't home. Paige's car was in the driveway, though. The old Honda I'd been worried about. Still burning oil. Still making sounds. Vic had borrowed a trailer from a friend, and we loaded it with everything that was clearly mine. Tools from the garage. The collection I'd been building since my first job at 17. The recliner my father had left me. Worn leather and creaky springs. Worth nothing to anyone except me. Boxes of photographs from before the marriage. We made 3 trips. The first one was the easy stuff. Things Colleen wouldn't notice missing. The second was harder. Items with shared history that I had to decide whether to fight for. The third was just me, walking through the house one last time. The garage hit me hardest. I'd spent hundreds of hours in that space, teaching Paige to change her oil, rebuilding carburetors on weekend projects, just existing in a place that felt like mine. The workbench was covered with tools I was leaving behind. Too big to move, too built into the house to take without a fight. You okay? Vic asked when I came out. I will be. You're really doing this, Vic said as we strapped down the last load. Yup. He clapped me on the shoulder. About time. The divorce papers were filed the following Monday. I had them served at the house while I knew Colleen would be home. The process server called me afterward to confirm delivery. Her voice totally flat. She seemed surprised, she said. I bet she was. Colleen's reaction came 3 days later, when she showed up at Vic's house unannounced. I was in the garage helping him finish the rocking chair when her car pulled into the driveway. The engine was running rough. I could hear the knock from 20 feet away. Probably needed new spark plugs and a fuel injector cleaning, but that wasn't my problem anymore. She got out looking like she hadn't slept. Hair messy, makeup smeared, the kind of disheveled that Colleen would never normally let anyone see. For a second, just a second, I felt something like guilt. Then I remembered the look on her face when she called a $32,000 gift pathetic. You filed for divorce, she said. Not a question. Yep. Without even talking to me first. Talking takes 2 people who actually want to listen. You made it pretty clear whose side you were on. She crossed her arms, her go-to defensive move. You're throwing away 28 years because of one bad night? I set down the screwdriver I'd been holding and gave her my full attention. One bad night? Colleen. It wasn't one bad night. It was 28 years of being taken for granted, topped off with you calling my gift pathetic and our daughter wishing she had a different father. In front of everyone. On her birthday. She didn't mean it like that. Then how did she mean it? She didn't have an answer. Vic had quietly disappeared into the house, giving us space. I want the house, she finally said. Paige and Chester are getting married next spring. We need the space for the wedding. I almost laughed. Showing up to haggle over real estate when the divorce papers weren't even dry yet. That took some nerve. Leonard Voss is handling all that, I said. Have your lawyer call him? Leonard Voss? Her eyes narrowed. You're using Victor's divorce lawyer? Yup. Jacob, this is crazy. We can work this out. You're just upset. I'm not upset, I said, and I meant it. I'm done. Big difference. She stared at me for a long moment, looking for something in my face. The old Jacob, maybe. The one who backed down, smoothed things over, wrote checks to make problems disappear. That guy was gone. You're going to regret this, she said. We'll see about that. She got back in her car and drove away, engine still knocking. I watched until she turned onto the main road, then went back inside to finish the rocking chair. Vic was in the kitchen, making coffee. How'd that go? About like you'd expect. He handed me a mug. You know she's going to fight dirty. Counting on it, I took a sip. Let her. I've got 31 years of records and a lawyer. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and preparation. Leonard Voss was worth every penny. He pulled records I didn't even know existed, tracked down documentation of every major purchase, every contribution to the household, every time I'd bailed Colleen out of a credit card hole she dug herself into. The picture that came together wasn't pretty. Over the years, I'd paid off more than $60,000 in credit card debt that Colleen had racked up. Department stores, online shopping, lunches and dinners that added up to hundreds a month. She'd been living beyond our means for years, and I'd been too focused on keeping the peace to call her out. Meanwhile, my business had been growing. Sheridan Auto went from 3 bays to 6, from 2 employees to 5. The shop was worth close to $400,000 now, built entirely on my reputation and my work. Colleen had never contributed a single hour. Leonard laid it all out in a spreadsheet that made my eyes water. Assets, liabilities, contributions, withdrawals. When I saw the numbers side by side, I felt sick. Not because of what I'd lost, but because of how long I'd let it go on. This is strong, Leonard said, tapping the spreadsheet. Very strong. Your wife's counsel will probably push for mediation before trial. Let them push, I said. I'm not taking less than what's fair. The shop became where I lived, basically. I threw myself into work, taking every job that came through the door, staying late to catch up on paperwork, arriving early to prep the bays. My guys noticed the change but didn't say anything. There's something about engine work that clears your head when you don't want to think about your personal life. The focus it takes to track down a problem, trace a fault, fix something that was broken. Every car I got running again felt like a win when everything else was chaos. One week, I had a customer bring in an old Mustang that 3 other mechanics had given up on. Intermittent stalling. No clear cause, the kind of problem that makes you want to push the car into a lake. I spent 2 days on it, traced the issue to a hairline crack in a vacuum line that only opened up when the engine hit a certain temperature. The customer nearly cried when I handed him the keys. That felt good. Vic stopped by every Tuesday with lunch. It became our thing. He'd show up around noon with sandwiches from the deli down the street, and we'd eat in my office while he told me about his latest woodworking project, and I filled him in on the divorce. Colleen's lawyer is pushing hard on the house, I told him one Tuesday. Says she has a right to it as the family home. What's Leonard say? That we can counter. The mortgage was paid off with my income. Her name's on the deed, but she never put a dime toward the payments. Vic nodded. You still have records of all that? Every check, every bank statement, every payment confirmation going back 22 years. He grinned. That's my brother. Paige reached out a month into the proceedings. Not a call, not a visit. A text message. 4 words. This is your fault. My fault. I'd worked 60-hour weeks to give her everything she wanted. Paid for her college when she dropped out after 2 years. Paid for her apartment when she couldn't make rent. Paid for her car, her insurance, her dental work. The math didn't add up, but entitlement never does. I didn't respond to the text. The mediation happened in late October. Conference room in a downtown office building, all glass and chrome. Colleen showed up with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Elaine, who looked like she charged $500 an hour just to make eye contact. Leonard and I sat across from them. The mediator, a retired judge named Franklin, sat at the head of the table like he was running a very boring game show. Colleen wanted the house, half my retirement, and alimony. Her lawyer pitched it as fair compensation for 28 years of being a homemaker and supportive spouse. I kept my face blank while Leonard laid out our side. The spreadsheets came out, the bank records, the documentation of every major purchase, every debt I'd paid off, every contribution I'd made to the household. Elaine's face changed as she looked through the documents. She'd clearly expected a different story than what the numbers showed. You could practically watch her rethinking her whole approach. My client built his business from nothing, Leonard said calmly. He paid off the family home with income from that business. He covered over $60,000 in credit card debt run up by Mrs. Sheridan over the years. The idea that he should now hand over half of everything to someone who contributed nothing financially is frankly insulting. Colleen's face went red. I raised our daughter while he worked. Paige is 26 years old, Leonard replied. She hasn't needed raising in almost a decade. What have you contributed since then? The mediator called for a break. We stepped out into the hallway, and Leonard pulled me aside. They're going to come back with something more reasonable, he said. Elaine knows her case just took a hit. What do you think they'll offer? Probably the house in exchange for dropping the alimony. Maybe a smaller cut of retirement. I thought about it. The house where I'd lived for 22 years. Let them have the house, I said. I don't want it anymore. Leonard nodded. What about the business? Off limits. She doesn't touch the shop. When we went back in, Elaine presented a revised offer. The house, 30% of retirement, no alimony. Leonard countered with the house, 15% of retirement, and a clean break. They took it. Walking out of that building, I felt lighter than I had in years. The house was gone, but it had stopped feeling like home a long time ago. The money was manageable, and Sheridan Auto was still mine. Every wrench and lift and bay. Vic was waiting in the parking lot. He'd insisted on driving me. Well, he asked. It's done. House is hers. Shop is mine. He clapped me on the shoulder. Then let's go celebrate. I'll buy you dinner. Winter came early that year. First snow in mid-November. The kind that sticks around and makes everyone miserable. I moved into an apartment across town, a 2-bedroom with a view of the parking lot and neighbors who kept to themselves. I spent Thanksgiving at Vic's place. Just the two of us, eating sandwiches and watching football, because neither of us could cook a turkey without turning it into a biohazard. He'd finished the rocking chair and presented it to me like it was a trophy. Beautiful work, smooth finish, perfectly balanced. Oak, hand-selected from a lumberyard 3 hours away, because Vic doesn't do anything halfway. The joints were tight, the curves felt right, the whole thing was built to last generations. I put it on my balcony and sat in it every morning with my coffee. You're getting philosophical in your old age, Vic said when he caught me out there one morning. I'm learning to appreciate small things, I replied. Paige got married in March. I wasn't invited. Heard about it secondhand from a cousin who still talked to both sides of the family. Small ceremony, backyard venue, the same backyard where she told me I wasn't a decent father. Funny how that worked out. Chester's parents paid for everything, according to the cousin. The dress, the catering, the photographer. Colleen contributed the venue, which was really my contribution since I'd mowed that lawn for 22 years, but who was counting anymore? Besides me. I didn't send a gift. Didn't send a card. Just let the day pass like any other Tuesday. Spring brought some changes. The shop was busier than ever. Word of mouth filling my bays with more work than my guys could handle. I hired 2 more mechanics, young guys fresh out of trade school, who reminded me of myself 30 years ago. Hungry, eager to learn, willing to put in the hours. I was building something new. Not just the business, but a life that wasn't all about people who didn't appreciate me. Joined a bowling league with Vic, which sounds lame until you realize it's just an excuse to hang out and throw heavy objects at wooden pins once a week. Our team was called the Spare Parts, which I thought was clever. We were terrible, consistently last place, but nobody cared. It was 2 hours every Thursday, where the only thing that mattered was knocking down pins and talking about nothing important. Started cooking for myself instead of eating takeout every night. Turns out I'm not bad at it when I actually try. It felt good making something with my hands that didn't involve engines or wrenches. Even adopted a dog from the shelter, a grumpy old mutt named Bruno, who'd been passed over by everyone looking for puppies. He was 8 years old and had the personality of a retired bouncer. The shelter lady said he'd been there 6 months and nobody wanted him. I signed the paperwork that afternoon. Bruno and I got each other. We'd both been left behind by people who wanted something newer, and we'd both decided that staying bitter about it was a waste of time. He didn't need much, just food, walks, and someone to sit with while the sun went down. I could do that. I'd spent decades doing more for people who appreciated it less. The binder idea came to me one night while I was going through old tax returns for the shop. I'd kept everything, every receipt, every statement, every record of every dollar that had flowed through my hands for the past 3 decades. Paige used to make fun of me for it, called me a hoarder, said normal people threw that stuff away. Normal people didn't end up needing proof that they'd spent a lifetime supporting ungrateful family members. Turns out my paranoia was actually preparation. I started putting it together, the same way I approached a complicated engine rebuild. Section by section, year by year. College tuition payments from when she enrolled. Then the refund I never got when she dropped out after 2 years because she decided school was boring. apartment rent for the 3 different places she'd lived when she couldn't make ends meet, car insurance premiums that I kept paying even after she was old enough to handle it herself. There were medical bills when she broke her arm skiing in college, a trip I'd also paid for. Credit card statements from when she maxed out her first card at 22 and I bailed her out. The dental work when she cracked a tooth and didn't have coverage. Emergency car repairs when she ignored warning lights until something actually broke. The numbers added up to just over $140,000. That's what I'd put into Paige beyond the basics of food, shelter, and clothing. $140,000, not counting inflation, not counting the interest I'd lost by emptying my savings over and over instead of letting it grow. I put it all in a black binder with tabs and labels. Set up like a case file. Just facts. On the cover, I wrote 3 words. What I gave. Vic saw it during one of his Tuesday visits. Picked it up, flipped through it, let out a low whistle. "What are you going to do with this?" he asked. "Not sure yet. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of years." He set the binder down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You know this won't change how they see things." "I know, but it might change how everyone else sees things." He was quiet for a minute. Then he nodded. "If you're going to do something, do it right. Send them to the people who matter. Let the facts speak for themselves." The opportunity showed up 6 months later, like it had been waiting for the right time. Paige and Chester bought a house. Heard about it from the same cousin who kept me in the loop on family stuff. Nice place in a subdivision on the north side of town. 3 bedrooms, 2-car garage. The thing about buying a house is that you need good credit and a solid income. Chester's insurance job wasn't exactly bringing in big money, and Paige was working part-time at a boutique making barely above minimum wage. So how'd they afford the down payment? The numbers didn't add up, and I'm good with numbers. The cousin filled in the gaps. Colleen had taken out a home equity loan on the house I'd given her. Used the money to help Paige and Chester with their down payment. $40,000. Borrowed against equity I'd built with 30 years of engine work and overtime hours. The same house I'd paid off early. The same house I'd walked away from to keep the peace. Now bankrolling another generation of entitlement. I shouldn't have been surprised. But hearing it out loud, hearing that my work had been turned into a gift for the daughter who'd publicly wished for a different father, something in me just went quiet. Vic noticed the shift when he came by that Tuesday. "You've got that look," he said, setting down his sandwich. "What look?" "The one you get right before you do something either really smart or really stupid." He studied me for a second, then nodded. "Whatever you're planning, just make sure you can live with it after. That's the only rule." I could live with it. That was the thing. I'd spent 28 years biting my tongue and living with choices I didn't make. This one would be mine. I made copies of everything in the binder, 27 pages of documentation, plus a cover letter explaining what each section showed. Then I sent it to the only 2 addresses that mattered. Colleen's sister, who'd always seemed to get my side of things, and Chester's parents, who apparently thought they'd raised a self-sufficient son marrying a self-sufficient woman. I didn't include a return address. Didn't include a note asking for sympathy or understanding. Just the facts, laid out clearly, and let people make their own calls. From there, it spread the way things spread in small towns. Someone tells someone, who tells someone else, and within a week, half the county knows your business. Things started falling apart within a week. Chester's parents called Paige wanting answers. Why had they heard that Jacob paid for her college? Her apartment? Her car? Why had they thought Paige was financially independent when the numbers said otherwise? They'd helped pay for their son's house, only to find out their daughter-in-law came with a lot more baggage than advertised. The conversations weren't fun. Chester's mother, from what I heard, used the word deceived more than once. His father asked some pointed questions about what other surprises were coming. Colleen's sister called Colleen. That didn't go well either, according to the cousin. Lots of yelling, lots of accusations, years of family drama finally blowing up. Colleen had apparently been telling her side of the family that I was the crazy one, that I'd bailed on my family over nothing. The binder told a different story. Her sister started asking questions Colleen didn't want to answer. Chester also started asking questions Paige didn't want to answer. The cousin said there was tension, fights, long silences stretching through whole evenings. The newlywed honeymoon was done, replaced by what happens when you realize your partner came with more history than you signed up for. Chester's parents had apparently pushed for couples counseling. Paige had apparently told them to stay out of it. That went about as well as you'd think. I heard all of this secondhand, through the family grapevine. I didn't reach out, didn't gloat, didn't do anything that could look like rubbing it in. Here's the thing about facts. They don't need you to defend them. You put them out there and let people do the math. Colleen could spin whatever story she wanted, but she couldn't argue with bank statements. Paige could say she was independent all day long, but the receipt said something else. Colleen tried reaching out once. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. I hope you're happy with what you've done. I was. Genuinely. The confrontation happened on a Sunday evening in late fall. I was out on my balcony with Bruno when a car pulled into my apartment complex. Paige's car. The same Honda I'd worried about for years. Somehow still running. She got out slow, like she wasn't sure she wanted to be there. Took her time walking to my building, then up the stairs. The knock on my door was hesitant. I opened it and looked at my daughter for the first time in over a year. She looked beat. Older than 27. The kind of tired you get when you figure out the world isn't going to give you what you want. Can I come in? She asked. Balcony's fine. We sat out there. Her in the spare chair, me in the rocker Vic had made. Bruno sniffed her once, decided she wasn't worth his time, and headed back to his bed by the sliding door. Chester's parents won't even talk to us, she said. They're furious. They think I lied about everything. Did you? She dodged the question. They didn't need to know all that old stuff. The past is what built your present. You think that down payment came from nothing? That house your mother mortgaged? I paid for it with my hands. Every dollar she gave you started with me. You didn't have to tell everyone. No, I agreed. I didn't. But you didn't have to call me a pathetic father in front of your friends either. Actions have consequences. That's something you should have figured out a long time ago. She stared at me, and for a second I saw the kid who'd crashed her bike and come running to me with bloody knees. The girl who trusted me to make everything okay. I'm sorry, she said. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. Sorry it happened, or sorry you got caught. The question just hung there. She didn't have a quick answer, which told me everything. I want to fix this, she finally said. I want my dad back. I rocked slowly. You know what's funny? I said. I never left. You pushed me out. You and your mother standing in that driveway, making it clear that nothing I did would ever be enough. I gave you 26 years of my life, and you threw it back at me because I bought the wrong brand of car. I was stupid. I was spoiled. I get that now. Do you? Because there's a difference between knowing something and actually understanding it. You can know you hurt someone without getting why it mattered. She wiped at her eyes. What do you want me to do? Just tell me and I'll do it. I looked right at her. See, that's the whole problem. You want me to hand you a script, tell you how to act so everything goes back to how it was. But how it was? That was you taking and me giving until I had nothing left. Then what? You want to fix this? Earn it. Don't just show up with sorry and expect everything to be fine. Start being someone who gets the value of what she threw away. When you can look me in the eye and tell me what you've actually changed, not just what you feel bad about, then maybe we talk. And if I do, then maybe we have a conversation. But I'm not making promises. And I'm not sitting around waiting while you decide if I'm worth the effort. Now I'm putting myself first. If that's too hard for you, there's the door. She sat there for a while, working through it. I could see her wanting to argue, wanting to push back, but she held her tongue. Maybe she'd finally learned that attitude wasn't going to win this one. I'll try, she said quietly. Trying's a start. She left a few minutes later. Head down. No hug, no big promises, none of the dramatic makeup scene I half expected. Just walked to her car and drove off. The engine still sounded rough. Probably would until she learned to take care of things herself. Bruno wandered back out and dropped at my feet. I scratched behind his ears and watched the last of the daylight fade. I didn't know if Paige would actually follow through. Didn't know if she had it in her to change the way real fixing things required. But that was on her now, not me. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.